Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Power BI webinar. This is going to be about how to handle working with data that we collect from survey results. My name is Alison Kennedy. I'm a Microsoft certified trainer and Microsoft certified professional. I've got an MCSA in BI reporting. And I'm also a Power BI community super user, so I spend a lot of time working with Power BI, helping people with questions about their data, and trying to get some insights out of lots of different types of data sets. So today we are going to look at using Microsoft Forms data as our data set, but Microsoft Forms just puts all of the responses into an Excel sheet for us. And so this is going to be helpful for any of you that use data from Excel and are using SharePoint or Microsoft Teams. So I'm going to show you how you can connect to that Excel data and not need to set up any sort of special gateway or get any help from IT to be able to refresh that data automatically. We're going to spend a lot of time in Power Query in the data model because the survey comes through as a nice flat Excel file, but that doesn't always give us the best thing that we need for our visualizations and our insights and who we're trying to build a report for. It's really important to know the why. So I will touch on some visualizations in the report, some publishing options, what we're actually trying to achieve, but I'm going to try and make more of the focus on the Power Query data model side of things today. So the first thing that we will look at is our data source. So if you look at the right-hand side of your screen, you should see the Q&A for this session. I will try to keep an eye on that Q&A. If you can hear me, if you can give a thumbs up on one of my responses there. I've got one question already that says, is there any sound? So if you could just give me a thumbs up and let me know that I'm not talking to no one, that'll be fantastic. And otherwise, in that Q&A, there should be a link to the survey that we are working on today so that you can follow along and understand what data we're actually using. All right, so the first thing that we will do is have a look at this Microsoft Forms survey. And so this Microsoft Forms allows you to create surveys, nice and easy, lots of different question types. If you've taken the survey, you'll have seen I've tried to put one of each type of question that you can use from Microsoft Forms just to demonstrate the different options. And it collects the responses and it gives us some pretty charts and graphs. It even gives us some insights. But this doesn't really tell me a whole lot. I know that 8% of people answered 18 to 24 and 100% of them said passive answer, but what is question 8? What is a passive answer? And that's what Power BI is going to be able to help show us. And we can actually build and customize our own report to get some better insights. So here, I've built my Power BI report from that survey data. And if I choose the people from 18 to 24 range, I can now see exactly what they've answered in all of those questions. And it's not ambiguous. I don't have to guess what passive answer or what question 8 actually is. So this is what I'm going to show you how to build today. So from the survey, we need to start by finding the data. So the first thing we do in Forms is we're going to open this in Excel. And because I did a group form, this is being stored in my group SharePoint site. And here's my Excel file. And I need to open this in the desktop app. I'm going to open Excel, and that will start opening Microsoft Excel, and here it is in desktop. And the reason I have to open it in desktop is because I need to click File, Info, and I need to copy this path. And that is the information that I need in Power BI to be able to create a link to that data source. So I'm now going to open up a new report in Power BI Desktop. So Power BI Desktop is a free application from Microsoft. You can download it from the web and you can have a play with it and explore. So if you're not using it, you can download it, try it out, see how it goes. It connects to lots of different data sources, and because it's not actually inside the Excel file, you can't actually break any of this data. So all of these results here, I'm not going to be able to touch them when I'm in Power BI Desktop. So in Power BI Desktop, I am going to get data and do some reporting on it. So I know that that file is an Excel file, but because it's stored on SharePoint Online, I'm actually going to choose the Get Data from Web option. So in here, I am going to paste that hyperlink that I copied from that Excel desktop application, and I'm going to delete the web equals 1 and the question mark at the end. So I've just got that hyperlink that I showed you how to copy, and I've done Get Data from Web. And this is going to enable me to create a direct connection to my SharePoint Excel file. And that means that it makes it really easy for me to refresh this data and always have the latest information, the latest survey results, or whatever is in this Excel file in your Power BI report. So you can see that even though that was Get Data from Web, it's recognized that this is an Excel file. And I can see the sheets and the tables in that Excel file. So I am going to use table 1 as my data source, and I could load this data, but if I have a look and a preview at it, it's kind of messy. When you guys were ranking the cities, they all come through in one column. And when you were choosing what apps you use, they all come through in one column. And so I'm not going to be able to count how many of you use Power BI, because I need to split this out into lots of different columns. So rather than loading the data, I need to transform it. And again, this is going on a layer on top of the data in Excel, so I'm not changing anything in the raw data itself. And that's what is so fantastic about Power BI, is that that survey can be working and ticking along. Whoever set up that Excel file, they can be using it as normal, and I can do my analysis on top of it. So this is the raw data, and so I am going to call this raw data. And because I've got lots of different types of questions in here, I've got some demographic information about who you are and what you do. I've got different types of responses that I want. I am actually going to keep this data as it came to me, and I am going to reference it in further queries, and I'm going to start to create a nice data model, a bit of a snowflake scheme actually, and I'm going to create lots of different tables from this single table. So if I right click here on the raw data, there's an option here that says reference. And note that that's a link. So what that does is whatever this raw data looks like at this last step over here in the applied steps, that's what I'm going to get in this new query over here on the left-hand side. So I've now got raw data too, and I am going to call this dim responses. And dim has to do with my data model and relationships that we'll look at in a minute. But what I want here is I want one row for each person who's responded. And I just want to know their basic demographic information. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to choose the columns that I care about. And this is something that you should always do first when you are editing your data, is select what information you need. So I don't want any of those questions with the multiple choices, because those are going to take more than one row. I just want to know the demographic information, the job title, how long you've been in the role, the date. Simple questions that just have one response. Have you attended a course? Yes or no? Would you recommend? How would you rate? Okay, so once I've selected those columns, now I can start to add some calculated information on top of them. So I want to know how long it takes to complete this survey. Is it too long? Is that why I'm not getting responses? Are people rushing through it? So I can select multiple columns using the Control key. And in the Add Column tab, date and time. Okay. Since I'm assuming it takes you less than 1 day to complete this survey, we're going to go with time. So I am going to subtract the completion time from the start time. And so this gives me the duration. You can see there's a few outliers in here. Some of you clicked the link and then had it open for a while. But this is telling me how many hours, minutes, and seconds it takes you to complete the survey. Kind of difficult to average that information. So now that I've got this duration column, what I can do is I can say, well, I just want to know how many total minutes. So if it took 2 hours, that's 120 minutes. One click of a button, and there we go. We've got our total minutes time. So I've now added 2 new columns, and I am going to rename those columns and call them time to complete and minutes to complete. The last thing I'm going to do is I am going to create a date key column. And this is because when we are working with dates in Power BI, you can see how these have times on them. These dates here don't have times on them. Dates can be written in lots of different formats, and I want to be able to report on year to date, how many responses have I had, or what day of the week is the most popular for the responses. And in order to do that, I need a nice robust date table with all of that information. So I need to connect this to that table. And it's not reliable to use the date itself. I find it gives you 98% accurate results. I just made that number up. But it's much better to actually create a date key that is a text column. So I'm going to add a custom column in here, and I'm going to call this date key. And I do this every time I'm working with dates. And I am going to cheat a little bit on this data set because I asked you guys to pick your birthday or your favorite day in 2020, and I've gotten some dates that aren't in 2020. So I'm going to turn all of these dates into the year 2020 so that we can work with some time intelligence and see the recent results. So I'm going to convert this date column into text. And so I need to go and find that date column. There it is. And I want to format it as month, day, and I put the 2020 in front of that. So that has given me 2020, the month and the day for the date that you selected. And I will make that a text field, and we can see which day of the week is most popular for birthdays or favorite days. Imagine that that's when the results have actually come in. and see how you can do your trends and analysis on those. All right. So now what I am going to do is I'm going to continue referencing this raw data. So I'm going to reference it again, and this one I'm going to call dim questions. And this is just a nice little trick. I might be using this data set or this report for multiple different surveys, and the questions might change from time to time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get PowerBI to tell me what are the column headers, what are the questions. So rather than having the headers in the header, I am going to demote the headers and pull them down into that first row. And I don't care about your responses, I just want to know the questions. So I am going to keep just that top one row. Okay, that's great. I've got the questions not in columns, but now I'm going to go into transform and transpose. And suddenly I've got a list of all of the questions. And if this updates to another survey that we're doing next month or another Excel file, because I'm referencing not raw data, I only have to update that one query. And now I've got a list of all of those questions. And so I'll just rename this and call that question and make it a text data type. So I'm showing you lots of different things that you can do with your data. And just because I'm working with survey results doesn't mean that that's the only thing that you can use it for. So try and be thinking about how this applies to your scenarios. So what I'm going to look at now is I want to see what apps you guys use. How many of you are using Teams? How many are using PowerBI? So again, I'm going to reference that raw data and call this. This is going to start to give me some of the transactional information or the data that I'm actually going to be counting, summing, aggregating, putting into the columns and the bars of my charts. So we'll call this fact because of that, and currently used apps. So for this one, all I really care about is this ID, because that is what's going to connect me to that dim responses table. And I care about which Microsoft applications do you currently use. And that's it. Now we're going to start to see why I'm putting this in a separate table. Because I need to take this information that I've got here and split it into different rows. So I want to be able to count the total number of people that are using SharePoint and Teams in each app, so on and so forth. And so I could transform this split column by Delimiter. It's already picked up on the semicolon. I click OK. But that's not super helpful, right? I've got SharePoint and OneDrive and Teams all in the same column because some of you didn't choose exactly the same ones. I did a randomization on the forms so that there's no bias of you picking the ones at the top of the list and getting bored by the time you get to the bottom. So that's not going to work. What we can do is when we do a split column by Delimiter, look at your advanced options. And I can split this into rows. So when I split this into rows, I'm going to expand my data from my 14 rows that I currently have into 78. And so you can see that now I've got all of the apps in one column. I'm just going to do a filter to remove those blanks. And now I'll be able to count the apps that each person is using, and I'll know who that person is because of this ID here. So I'm going to call this apps we currently use. All right. And I can clean things up in here. That is going to take up a lot of space on my report, for example. So if I want, I can just do a nice simple replace values, and I can say, look for the words Power Automate and get rid of them. I might put that space in front as well. So now that just says flow, there's no space after it, nice and tidy, easy to report on. All right, next thing I want to know is what is your favorite branch or your favorite city? So what columns do you think I'm going to choose this time? Again, we'll call this a fact table, best branch. First step, choose columns. Yep, we need the ID. And if we're looking for the favorite branch, we are just going to choose the rank these cities. So on this one, I am going to do the standard split column by delimiter and split these into columns. I don't need that column, so I'll remove that one. And I am going to be systematic in the way that I name these because I want to be able to have a nice English word for ordering, but I also want them to appear in the right order on my charts. And I know that Power BI handles text alphabetically. And first, second, third, and fourth, if you sort those alphabetically, they're not going to be in the order that you're expecting them to be in. So I'm giving it an order, a numeric number, as well as the text. Okay, so I've got the cities. I know what place you chose for those cities. But this is already in what I would consider a report format. And this is one of the problems we often have with survey data, is it comes through, it looks like this, and it is already a bit reported, and we need to flatten it. Okay, so this is as if it were in a pivot table. If you're really good at pivot tables, you would have put the ID in rows, you would have put the order that they chose in columns, and then you would get to see what cities. So because it's pivoted, I need to unpivot it. So I am going to select ID and unpivot other columns. So that flattens that for me. And now I just need to split this one again using my systematic naming. And so we'll name this order, and we'll name this one, what shall we call it? Rank. And this will be branch. Last thing I want to be able to do with these is I want to put them on a map. And again, I know Power BI really well, and so I know that it uses Microsoft Bing for mapping. And Microsoft are based in North America. And when I try to map Hamilton, it puts it in Canada. Unfortunate. So what I am going to do is I am going to add a custom column for country. And we'll just say country equals New Zealand. This is actually M code that I'm typing, but note that that's not overly complicated. It's not nearly as complex as the date key I was doing earlier. Just need to put any text in double quotes, and that's just going to create a single column for country, we'll set that data type to text. And now I can merge these two columns, and I am going to use a custom separator, comma space, and we'll call this branch location. Nice and easy. So when you know all of the possibilities, Power BI can enable you to make lots of quick transformations to your data. And now that I've taken the time to set this up, that's it, it's done. I don't ever have to do this again or come back and touch it and work on it again. Okay, so I can keep carrying on with this same process. I'm going to do another one, so we'll do fact, Likert, responses. And a Likert scale is when you rate multiple things at a time. So again, we always need that ID. And this time I am looking for these questions where I asked you how confident you were using Office 365 or Microsoft 365 to do these bits of information. What does this look like? Pivot or unpivot? So we need to transform. I've selected the ID, and we're going to unpivot the other columns. So now I have the question and the response. And the last one that I will do here is a dim date table. And what I'm going to do with the dim date table is show you how to use the advanced editor. So if you've got a dim date table in your data set, you're pulling from a database, that's fantastic. But I'm pulling from a survey, so I don't have a dim date table. But I also don't need to reinvent the wheel. I can do a new blank query. And there are plenty of blogs and resources on how to build a date table, and you can simply just copy the code and paste it into that advanced editor in a blank query. Done. And voila, all of that appears in your Power BI desktop. So we will call this dim date. And you'll see that this has that date key for me, and that is going to connect to my dim responses over here. All right. And now we can close and apply this data, but before we do, I'm going to take this raw data table that I've been using as my source. I don't need it anymore, right? I've got all of the information that I want, so delete. This is one of my favorite things about Power BI Query Editor is it won't let you ruin your referenced queries. So because I'm using that raw data and all of these other queries, it says, sorry, you can't delete that, but I don't want it cluttering up my report, so I'm not going to load it into the report. So now I'll close and apply. And Power BI is going to go back to that Excel file, back to that form that you've all been filling in, apply all of those changes and load them to the data model. You can see now it's detecting relationships. And so the first thing I need to do is go and have a look at these relationships. Okay. So if you name things the same, Power BI will pick up on the fact that that's a question, and so it's pulled through a relationship there. Here, it's connecting on that ID that I told you it was very important to keep the ID in all of those. For this survey, it's more of a complex relationship model than what we sometimes teach in the basic star schema. This is what we would call a snowflake. It's starting to get spread out, look a little bit more complex. And I've actually got a few different fact tables. I like to put all my fact tables at the bottom so that I can see how the data cascades and flows by following these arrows. So it goes from the dim date into the dim responses, and then it ends up at each of these fact tables. Because all of these fact tables are filtered by the dim responses, I should be able to see all of these information by that same ID and figure out what gender or job type or years in role have each of these bits of information. So what I need to do now that we've checked our relationships is go and start building my report. And so what we've done so far is we've grabbed the data, we've used Power Query to do all of these types of things. We've checked our data model. And now we are going to look at some tricks that we can do in the report visualizations to get some insights from that information. So the first thing that I am going to do is I am going to try and figure out the split of male and female. So in my responses, we have gender and ID. So what I want to do is I actually just want to do a count of ID. And most of the time, when I use this ID field, I want to count it. So when I select that column, I get this Column Tools tab in the ribbon. And the summarization that I want to use most frequently is the count. That's what we call an implicit measure. Power BI is implicitly looking at the column and it is doing a summarization or a count on that column. I have the option to use something called DAX and create an explicit measure. And what I like about explicit measures is it makes it really easy for your end user to find the information that they want, and it means I don't have to keep renaming things. So what I really want to know is how many total responses. So I'm going to create a new measure, and I'm going to call this total responses. If it's on a formula in Excel, you'll notice that DAX looks very similar to Excel. And I did a count of the ID over here. So I'm going to do a count of the ID here. Power BI gives me all of the options as I type. I wanted this ID from the dim responses table, so I'm going to choose this one here. Enter. That has created what we call an explicit measure, or some of my students call it a calculator because it has that calculator symbol next to it. So I'm going to put that explicit measure into my visualization, and you can see that it's the same information, but it's just a little bit easier to read and a little bit easier to understand what's going on. And there's no chance that that might accidentally turn into a sum or an average or anything that I don't want it to. So I've now got total responses by gender. And so we can see how the split is working and what's going on there. Okay. We'll now do the same thing with the age. And this one's going to be a little bit tricky because when I do total responses, and note if I tick this first, it automatically does a column instead of a table. So I'll do total responses by age. What's wrong with that? 45, 35, 18, back up to 25, 55, back down to 0. That's annoying. Not really what I want. So Power BI has this cool little hack that allows me to take any column and sort it by any other column that's in the same table. So what I need to do is I need to go back into my Power Query and transform the data. And I need to say, okay, in dim responses, look at this age column and give me an order. So in the age column, I want to know in order from 18 to 24 all the way up to 65 plus, and have that show up in the right order in my chart. And so I am going to create a conditional column. And we will call this age order. And in here, we'll say if age equals 18 to 24, then that's order 1. If age equals, and then we'll say 25 to 34, then order 2. Else. So this is an if statement. If anyone's ever done an if statement in Excel, it works exactly the same in Power Query. But we have this nice, beautiful interface that actually makes it somewhat intuitive to be able to work with. And so I don't have to deal with all of the brackets and the commas and figuring out where my syntax errors are. I do just have to select the column every time. And 55, I think, is one. Yeah. And I'm using explicit values here, but I could choose a column. So if I wanted to pick if the sales amount is blank, then do the quantity times the unit price, or work with multiple columns. If that, then 6. Else, hopefully nothing. Could leave that blank. I could have put the 6 down there as well. But that's how easy it is to do a condition or an if statement in Power Query. So I'll click OK. And that's going to give me a new column. And I am going to set that as a whole number so that that gets sorted numerically. And now I've updated my query, so I'll close and apply. And I'll come back to this report here. And all I need to do to fix it is find that field over here. So if I select this table, I can see the yellow ticks for where it's pulling information from, and that helps me focus in on that age column that I need to sort. Don't tick or untick the box. That's just going to remove and add it from this visual here. To get the column tools to show up, you'll notice that ticking that box doesn't get column tools to show up. Don't need that visual. You actually click on the word itself, and now I've got my column tools tab, sort by column, and I want to sort by age order. And what that enables me to do is when I sort by age, ta-da! So now I can see the ages in the right order of how I'd like them to be displayed. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I actually want to pull in a little bit more information for this next one. We'll maybe stay on this page. I want to know what's going on with this comfort level on these like it responses. Okay, so we have these responses here, and we have the ID as well. And I can count what's going on in there. But I don't know what the question is. If I try putting question in there, that doesn't look very pretty. So what I'm going to do now is look at a different type of visual, and this is called a matrix. This is the closest thing we have to a pivot table in Power BI. And you'll notice that it has the same fields that a pivot table has, your rows, your columns, and your values. So I'm putting the question in rows and the response in columns. And rather than viewing just the total count, because that doesn't really make it very easy for me to compare the analyzing data to the I know the best way, I'm actually going to give this a percentage. And so in Power BI, I've already shown you how to do these explicit measures using DAX. I've shown you how to do the implicit measures doing a count. And this takes the implicit one step further and says, okay, well, actually, I just want to see this 3 as a percentage of the total responses. So I want to know what the split is between their confidence level. This is a row. So I'm going to show value as percent of row total. And that gives me a little bit more information. I'm actually going to turn my totals off because that doesn't really mean anything. And these are 3 separate things, so I don't care about the summary altogether. So we will go into the format for this visual and turn the row subtotals off and the column subtotals off. Looking a little bit better. Still kind of hard to read, it's just a bunch of numbers. So now what I'm going to do is take this and give it conditional formatting of data bars. This is going to open up data bars. I can pick what color I want. I'm going to tell it to choose the highest and lowest value based on the data in here, or I can say I want the minimum to be 0 and the maximum to be 100 because we're working with percentages. And sorry, I might have to change that to 1. Conditional formatting, data bars. And so now you can see the progress towards the 100% and where most people feel comfortable with each of these areas. Looking pretty good, looking a lot better. What I'll do now is make these the same size, roughly. That gets a little bit tricky still in Power BI. One thing I will do with that is in the formatting, in the column headers, I can turn off the auto size column width so that once I've set the widths, it stays that way on the data refresh. But is anyone else bothered by the fact that these don't go in the right order? Because it drives me crazy. So what I am going to do is that ordering that we did with the age, we'll do the same thing in here. Ooh, and I've just picked up on the fact that it hasn't found that value right, so maybe we'll fix that as well. So I'm going to try and fix the order of these responses. And so I already showed you how to do that by adding a conditional column. But what we can do is, another way that we can do that is to actually go and store that information in Excel. So I'm now going to duplicate this query because I'm lazy and I don't want to copy the URL again. And if I go back to my Excel file, what I've done is I've added a little table in here that has those responses and the order that I want them in on my Power BI report. I converted that into a table. And so now in my Power BI, the source I want is that Excel file. But for the navigation, I'm going to click on the settings, and I'm actually going to navigate to the Likert responses. And so that gives me this table with the order that I want the responses to come in. And the dim responses age order isn't picking up because we are getting a couple of 7s. So the 7 is what I did for else. So it's not recognizing the 0 to 18. And so if I copy that in my added conditional column, that's why. Age equals, we'll paste that, and we'll make that 0. All right. So applied steps, you can go back and forth and edit and fix things without having to start over. You don't have to do it again. Once it's done, the data refreshes. You'll see I've now got more rows in here than we did the first time. Close and apply. That should move that. There we go. And we'll sort that ascending order. Much better. And to fix this one, what's my last step? I need to, because I've added more data, I need to check my model and my relationships. So I should have a dim Likert responses somewhere. Or no, because I forgot to enable the load. So because I duplicated a query that wasn't being loaded, that one didn't load. So we'll load that back to the model. And that will appear over here. Looks for relationships. It's found one. Order to order. No. That is not right. So I've double clicked that to edit this relationship. And the dim Likert responses needs to connect to the fact Likert responses based on the response. That's more like it. So now in here, instead of using this response, I am going to untick that, and I'm going to use the Delimiter response. And I am going to sort this by the order. And so now that's a lot more meaningful than it was before. We can clearly see where most people fall. Most of us manage to get by with analyzing and presenting data. Quite a few of us are pretty good at helping others, but we're not fully confident that we know the best way or the way. And that's probably why you're here seeing what PowerBI has to offer. So the last thing I want to do today is have a look at how many of you are currently using PowerBI. And so we've got this currently using apps, and I'll just tick that box, and that gives me a list of the apps that are being currently used. I didn't give you the option of words, so a few of you have added that in. And so that's the other response. So those are coming through as your free text field, something that we love with data analysis, right? And this fact currently used apps table, I'm going to swap back to my model view for a minute. And so the fact currently used apps table, that's connected to my dim responses. And so I should be able to count the total responses. What happened there? So when we look at these relationships, the arrow or the direction that this relationship goes in is very important. And so I can use the dim table to filter counts and sums and averages in these fact tables. But I cannot use a fact table to filter, I get stuck there. I say, sorry, go back the other way. So this table does not filter any counts or sums and averages in this table. It does not work that way. So if I want to count the total apps that are being used, I need to do that in that fact table. So I am going to go back to the report, and I am going to do another count in here. So we'll do a new measure, and we'll call this total users, and count the ID. And because of my relationships, I can't swim upstream. I can't go against that arrow to get to any of my dim tables. So I am going to count the ID from the currently used apps fact table. And so we'll use that measure and get rid of the total responses. And now I can explore different visuals and see how I like to see that. So we could try that as a pie chart, or PowerBI has a tree map. So I could do a tree map to see which apps are being used, which ones are the most popular. So most of us are using Excel. Quite a few of us are using PowerBI. Less of us are using forms. And if I want to focus on a certain demographic, that filters and updates everything else. So, like I said, I focused a lot more on the data modeling and Power Query side of things. I haven't got this report looking too beautiful and pretty just yet. But I've shown you a couple of nice tricks in here. The show value as, do those percentages. I could do that on this one as well. So I could do percent of grand total, and that's a great way to present your data to the customer or the stakeholder. They don't actually need to know what the total sales are. They just want to know how they compare to the rest of the market. So this kind of gives them that market share analysis without you having to do any work. I just clicked one button and there we go. So now you don't know how many people are in there, you just know where you stand compared to the others. So once we've got this report looking really beautiful and how we like it, we click this publish button here. And that is going to send the report to PowerBI.com, Power BI web service. And in PowerBI.com, we've got lots of different workspaces that we can work in. So I'm working in my demos workspace, and here's that survey says report that I've published. And so we can see the matrix that we've created, the tree map. I've got a few different buttons on here. If I click that, gives me some information and tells me what to do and how to use this report. This is just a text box that I put in the report. Close that, it goes away. Now I can interact with the report and see what's going on. This is grayed out, but it says select an app above. Okay, so I'll select that app above. Now it says drill through to Excel attendee demographics. So I'll click it. It's taken me to the next page, and now I'm only looking at Excel users. And one thing that I did not get time to mention is looking in the marketplace for custom visuals. This is one thing that we can do to handle free text, because you can see with your job title, I gave that to you as a free text field, and that's not really giving me a lot of information. So if I did that as a word cloud instead, now I can kind of see a little bit more what's going on with the different job titles and what areas you're in, and get some more insights than if I just tried doing it as a graph here. Okay, so the last thing I'll show you is sharing. What I've done is I've actually done a publish to web public on this report. And so if I copy this address here, I can actually send that to you in the featured questions. So I will put that link there so you can click that link. This is the report we created today. So that has all of the live survey results, all of the answers that you guys have completed while I was talking and you were getting bored, or that you did before the session. And that will actually refresh on a daily basis, because I have used in my data set 3 dots. I'm going to look at the schedule refresh. And remember at the very beginning, I showed you how to connect directly to the SharePoint Excel file and grab the link. And so because we did that, it knows that it's got authentication signed in as me to access that Excel file that's on SharePoint. And so as more data comes into this Excel file, it automatically gets pushed through to the Power BI data set, and you can schedule that refresh up to 8 times a day without needing any help from anyone else in the IT department. You don't need to build a gateway, because it's all in the cloud in SharePoint, and so we can automatically manage that refresh and that schedule. So I hope you found this useful. I hope you've learned couple of tricks about what you can do with Power BI and how it works. And for those of you that aren't currently using Power BI, maybe we can start getting that box there to get a little bit larger and grow a little bit more. So what I'll do is I will do a refresh now on this data set. And so for those of you that have clicked the link and are exploring that public published to web data set, give it a couple of minutes to finish its refresh. So it's doing scheduled refresh, and that one has just completed. So you should be able to refresh that page and you'll be able to get all of the latest and greatest results come through and updated. Thank you very much for your time. I had one question about fixing line 18. I don't remember where I was in the presentation when you asked that question. So if you have that question still, if you could just reply to that with your email or more details around it, and I'll get back to you. But otherwise, thank you guys very much and all the best with your Power BI journey.